So I'm recording this video in order to offer an explanation on the correction of the latest assignment that you worked on Saturday morning. I tried to be much more simple this time, so I simply collected the main information from the French text, which was, I have to admit, a bit opaque, a bit obscure sometimes, and used a bit of jargon, so I hope you didn't struggle too much with the French version of the article. So the first step when you read this article is to extract, as I said, the main ideas, and as you can see, I did what I usually do, which is I sum up each paragraph or each main sentence that appears to me as being relevant or significant, and I rephrase it very quickly in a list. So if I'm left here with how many? 9 sentences, so that the entire article is downsized to those 9 sentences. As you can see, I tried to make it crystal clear, so I don't have to go back to the text. At this stage, what I will try to do is not to go back to the text to check what I've already read, because this is supposed to be enough, like this collection of ideas, for me to understand the structure of the text. Right, so I follow the order of the text at this stage, and once I'm done, I extract those 3 main ideas. So you probably noticed that it was a very classic type of plan. It was the typical, there's a phenomenon, and then what are the plus sides, and maybe the downsides. Okay, so that was a fairly classic one, and as you can see here, I've got the perspective of prospected increase in teleworking. Prospected means that it's expected. There's an increase in teleworking that is expected in the future. It is growing and gaining momentum and gaining traction. So this is something that is likely to gain ground. So this is the phenomenon that is described. Then they give you the reasons behind the boom of teleworking. So it's not so much the plus sides, but it's really the reasons. Yeah, if I'm totally honest, it's not plus size, but the reasons for this phenomenon, and then maybe the limits, right? So I went on the wrong plan, but phenomenon, reasons, and limits, right? Challenges it raises. Obviously, in this phenomenon, not only will I describe what is going on, but I will maybe try to retrace like the historical emergence of teleworking, because part of the article was dedicated to telling you, for example, when it started with the Balladeur's report, and then the Brussels G7 economic and social report. So I will include this part in the perspective. Amazingly enough, I know perspective is the future, but you have the perspective is like you're taking an outlook from where it was to where it's going. So that's why I called it perspective. And I will include this in the phenomenon, right? So I'm taking that off. I used color, so color code is very easy for you to see how I arrange my ideas. And you will probably not notice that I did not clearly define each part. You don't get like red part, green part, blue part, and that's it. I crisscrossed, or I interweaved my ideas a bit more. I have to say I maybe stuck more to the order of the text this time, because I thought it was more comfortable to read. And you can do this as well, as long as you have all the elements. It doesn't matter if it's exactly in the same order. The plan is here, just that I restructured it and rebalanced it all over. So in terms of perspective of the increase in teleworking, I started with, as a quarter of French employees teleworks already, the spur behind this new form of work environment. So the idea of a spur is that kind of star-shaped element, it's not an element, but a device you get at the back of your boot when you're riding a horse, so that when you use it, it spurs the horse to go forward. So it's an incentive. A spur would be, a similar word would be an incentive. Sorry, incentive. I'm going to get there. right? So a form of encouragement. So this first part is telling you about how already 25% of the French population is using it. But I already introduced the reason behind this, saying is accountable to, which means is due to, is accountable to both the increase in fuel prices and the growing relaxation of its legal restrictions. So I already offered two reasons behind this, and I think it was at the very beginning of the text as well. So I kept this order, but you are allowed to do so. Then I will explain why this phenomenon is happening already. Not so much explain, but add elements. It's not because otherwise I would have said the reasons for this, or when I say indeed, I will add elements to this phenomenon. So indeed, after 25 years of shilly-shallying is a term in English we use when people are prevaricating. They keep discussing things, they're undecisive regarding teleworking. So I translated this with this really funny word that we use in English, shilly-shallying. The government is increasingly easing the statutory framework of teleworking. So I'm not going through all the details here, but I'm showing how with every single report, the laws are relaxing or easing on teleworking, right? And instead of giving details about those, I consider these are just extra information that I do not have space to include in my summary. So I simply said easing the statutory framework of teleworking. Yet, and I am allowed to introduce a contrast within a part that I'm developing, even though since the 2000s, both the EU and the French government have encouraged it by extending its applications. Notice that since precisely, right? I need to use a present perfect here. Sorry to maybe just cram it down your throat, but I want you to remember that this is a trigger for the present perfect. So even though the laws are becoming or they're encouraging the application of teleworking, workers have snubbed it. So the thing is that workers at first didn't take to it. They were reluctant to use teleworking. So there's something that is mentioned in the text. I can't remember where I wrote this in here. But I said until it recently spiked up again. So I'm explaining this phenomenon, even though at first it didn't suddenly soar and people didn't take to it immediately. It recently spiked up. It means it recently went up. To spike up is to go up or to increase. So I'm playing with the vocabulary here. I do not want to reuse the same vocabulary twice. So I will try to play with the synonyms that I've got at hand. Right, so this is the phenomenon that I've explained, and I've covered already a third of the article. Moving on to the reasons behind the boom. So I introduced my first part here with something that makes it very visible and clear for the reader that I'm going to talk about the reasons. So this boom may be accounted for, it means it may be explained or accounted for, by the many economic and social benefits such as work from home option offers, since it seems to boost productivity and reduce commuting, both time-consuming and environmentally harmful. So all these assets that are mentioned here, the fact that increasing productivity, more trust and autonomy, and in the text they also mention the fact that obviously it cuts down on CO2 emissions and on the time you need to go to work. I've added all of this in a single sentence. You see, this is just one sentence from start to finish. And the last part is the limits that teleworking raises, or at least that it questions. And I said beyond setbacks such as rising workloads and personal costs. So what I did here is I included the downsides. So people complain that it gives you more work at home and that it includes personal costs because you need to equip yourself with the right material. So I mentioned this, saying beyond setbacks such as rising workloads and personal costs. The very concept of teleworking questions the managerial relations to employees as well as the remote appraisal of performances. So it questions here work relations between management and employees, especially the assessment of performance. You know, how to evaluate the work of someone who works from home. How do you evaluate the number of hours they spend on the work they have to do, or how efficient they are? So all I did here is I rephrased these terms. Instead of saying assessment, like this verb, which is an evaluation, I used the word appraisal, which is another word for assessment. So once again here, it's just a playing field for me with the vocabulary. And that's pretty much it. And by the end, and very similar to the text, I ended with this unwavering upward trend, which means that I ended with this idea that this phenomenon was increasing and it was far from coming to an end or coming to a close. So I ended this summary with those issues are not likely to derail its growing success, saying that it's not because there are setbacks or downsides, setbacks is downsides, or disadvantages. It's not because there are disadvantages that it's likely to disappear or to derail. So I ended up the text by stressing once more how this trend was gaining momentum. So this is a new way of organizing your ideas. This is something I hadn't touched upon in class because I wanted you to first focus on having a plan before you can start playing with your plan. And see, as long as I've got everything I need, it doesn't matter that it's all mixed up. Obviously, you have to take what I'm saying with a pinch of salt because you need those link words. We need to understand why you're doing so. If you just jumble all the ideas in all directions just in order to cover everything, but it goes in all directions, like left, right, and Chelsea, it doesn't make any sense. You want to have something that is coherent and consistent. In this sentence, we understand why it's here. We explain that there's a phenomenon and we explain the reason why. So it makes sense to have those two ideas together. But if you suddenly, I don't know, put this part plus this part together, that like advantage and inconvenient in the same paragraph, that would sound a bit weird, even though that's something we might envisage depending on how you're doing it. As long as we've got link words, or at least we've got transitions towards where you're going. When it comes to the essay, one thing you had to pay attention to, and I'm recording this on Saturday morning, so I haven't corrected your papers yet. But the one thing you had to avoid is only speak about teleworking, because the subject was to what extent will technology impact labor markets in the future. And when we talk about technology, yes, indeed, we might think about teleworking as people are using networks and working from home on the internet using their computers. But technology might also be automation, for example, the introduction of AI at work, so it covered much more than simply teleworking. And if you simply narrowed or restricted your essay to this, maybe that was a bit of a shame. And you could really enlarge and extend and open up this topic to more widely the emergence of technology in the world of the labor market, which means the job market, or simply work. So very quickly, because you will probably very easily see where I'm going, I will focus on the introduction, because the introduction gives away already what I've done with the rest of my essay. So I always start with a general statement, remember, so it's just something that places the subject, undeniably recent technological advances, in a context of growing information-laden societies. I created an adjective here, which means that societies are packed with information. To be laden is to be burdened with something, to have something to carry. So information-laden societies have altered the outlook on employees' relations to work. Right, so I'm already stating in my general statement that there's an issue here, which means that the growing presence of technology is changing, modifying or altering the relations between employees and employers. Now, next is rephrasing the question. I didn't do much here. I just rephrased it nicely so that it was not just simply dumping the question in the introduction and that's it. So I said, in the light of such major changes, we may wonder, and see here, I keep telling you to use one, and that would be better. One may wonder to what extent technology will impact labor markets in the coming years. So this is simply rephrasing the question. And the last part is telling you about the plan or the outline I've chosen. So beyond the traditional polarized conversation around the benefits and drawbacks of the prevalence of technology in the workplace, which means that my two parts will be about this polarized conversation. Polarized means people are poles apart. They are opposed in their views. So the opposition is between the benefits and drawbacks. So you might already imagine that I will probably dedicate the first part to the advantages, the second part to the drawbacks. And as you can see, I was very unbalanced here because I finished this one with very little to say, but it was the question of work itself is the last part. I could have balanced it a bit more, I suppose. I could have taken words off this paragraph to redistribute it in the last paragraph. But, well, see, even I'm not perfect when I write those essays. So we already know what my outline will be. So what I do in this paragraph is I just highlight the benefits of having technology at work. So I start with a really nice phrase that you can use, whether it be is a nice way of saying it may be this or it may be this. So whether it be teleworking or automation, technological cutting edge, I'm reusing the vocabulary I know, technological cutting edge innovations have made working conditions easier on many employees. And my first sentence in this paragraph already place the subject. I know I'm talking about the benefits because that's my first sentence. And if you read the second sentence, which is very long, I always write very long sentences, you can already know that I'm going to talk about the drawbacks. I say at the other end of the spectrum lurk the doomsters who envisaged the future of work as an exploitation of low-skilled workers. So my first sentence in each paragraph should already indicate or let the reader know in which, I'm using this phrase all the time, but in which direction you're navigating. So I explained, I'm adding information, so I'm using Indeed. Indeed, despite the countless criticisms leveled at Amazon's warehouses, for instance, suppliers and operators may avoid the physical strains, which means the pains, of carrying heavy parcels, and therefore, I'm using a lot of link words, okay? And as a result, pay the bodily price of toiling is working hard in tiresome tasks later on in life. So what I'm saying here is that the example I chose in order to offer an explanation on this first sentence is that people who work for Amazon, for instance, are enjoying the benefits of having automation. They do not have to carry heavy parcels or heavy burdens or heavy packages. They can use the technology and it saves their body, right? The physical activity is less intense. I'm adding another idea. Moreover, the environmental, so that's the second idea in my paragraph. I've given a first idea, I've added an example, now I'm adding a second idea. Moreover, the environmental ripple effects, which means the side effects, the consequences of relying on the internet or vast information networks enable a considerable cutback on the environmental footprint, which means we are reducing CO2 emissions each employee might be responsible for, not only from limiting their professional travel, but additionally from exchanging data much faster at the click of a key. So every time I put forward an argument, I come to back it up with an example. So I'm adding my second idea here, which is that it's environmentally friendly, and I explain why it is environmentally friendly. Well, it reduces commuting to work, and also exchanging data is on the computer. You do not have to move somewhere or drop data somewhere at a place. You can just do it from your computer. That's a bit of arguable idea when you think about it, because using the internet has a carbon footprint though. Because when you use your internet, you're using servers and they do pollute as well. But anyway, I'm not getting into those details. So moving on to my second part, okay, the second part of my plan, which was already mentioned here, the drawbacks. At the other end of the spectrum, so that's a nice one you could use, lurk. To lurk is someone who is hiding somewhere. Lurk, the doomsters are people who see the doom and gloom in everything. They see the negatives in everything. Right? They're very pessimistic people. The doomsters who envisage the future of work as an exploitation of low-skilled workers subjected to the hellish, like hell, pace of mechanical automation. So here, I'm talking about the people who think that if we are attached to the pace of machines, if we work with machines, we will have to adopt or adjust to the pace of those machines. And it's a form of exploitation because machines are never getting tired, quite unlike human beings. And I used the same example to counterbalance what I said. So Amazon referred to earlier, so I'm not stupid, I tell the reader that yes, I'm using the same example, is at the heart of many controversies regarding the rhythm imposed on its employees who have to keep up with the supplying of goods by indefatigable machines. So I'm explaining this. So once again, I'm using the same example, but showing that it can be looked at in a different light, okay, from a different stance. Others foresee is you can see the future, you can already predict robots taking humans over and enslave them to squeeze productivity out of them. So this is a very sci-fi scenario in which machines would surpass human beings and enslave them so that they might have them work as they please, while the operating systems might simply be answering to a flurry of algorithms. So this is the worst case of apocalyptic world in which machines would be the masters of the world and we would have to work for those machines and probably die because we are human beings and we can die from it. Okay. And the last part, which I wish I had developed a bit more because it's the object of the next chapter we will study, by the way, because the next chapter is about alternative lifestyles and we will discuss the future of work. Will there be work in the future, or will we all be lazy and not work anymore? So that's what I tried to tackle here very quickly. So once I've said, yes, there are benefits, but there are drawbacks, I need to elevate the debate towards something else. So I elevate the debate towards the philosophical conversation of the future of work itself. So the debate around the impact of technology upon workers might turn stale. When something turns stale, it means that, like it's becoming old, like you're having always the same argument. And once you've said, yes, there are benefits, but there are drawbacks, then where do you go from there? Right? So when it turns stale, it means it's stalling, like it's not moving forward anymore. It's stuck. Unless new questions addressing the very necessity of work in the future are raised. Can a task-free world, so I've tried to say a world without work, can a task-free world not be brought about with the help of technology itself? So I ended up with a rhetorical question here, asking the reader to think about how technology might maybe in the future be the way, maybe conducive to a world in which we do not need to work anymore. They will basically do all the things we don't want to do and we'll be free to dedicate our times to whatever we please. Right, so that was just an example. Once again, this is simply a suggestion. This is not an ultimate optimal version. I'm only human, so there are some shortcomings. As I told you, this was a bit too short. I could have developed this a bit more, but you get the idea, right, of what you're supposed to do. I hope this helped. And if you have any questions, do not hesitate to get in touch with me.